Abandoned in the void. Lieutenant Kira Voss had always been told she was too stubborn to die. As she lay in the shadow of a twisted rock formation on the moon Helios 9, blood seeping through her fingers as she pressed them against the wound in her side, she hoped that old saying would prove true one more time. The battle had been a bloodbath. The 47th Expeditionary Force had been ambushed by Xalfori troops who seemed to materialize from the very rocks themselves. Their chitinous exoskeletons blended perfectly with the jagged landscape, making them nearly invisible until they were practically on top of you. Tactical retreat. Fall back to checkpoint Delta. The commander's voice had crackled over the comms as plasma fire rained down around them. Kira had been covering the east flank when a Xalfori blade rifle shot caught her in the side. The impact had sent her tumbling into a ravine, out of sight of her squad. By the time she'd regained consciousness, the sounds of battle had moved far beyond her position. They'd either assumed she was dead or couldn't risk coming back for her. Standard protocol in a hot zone. The twin suns of the Helios system cast harsh shadows across the lunar landscape as Kira took stock of her situation. Her combat suit's medical system had already deployed nanocoagulants to slow the bleeding, but the wound was serious. Her ammo was low, 3 plasma cells for her sidearm, 1 grenade, and her combat knife. Her communications were fried. The Xalfori were notorious for their signal jammers. "All right, Voss," she muttered to herself. "First step, don't die." She dragged herself deeper into the shadow of the rock formation, wincing as every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body. Her helmet's visor displayed her vitals. Elevated heart rate, dropping blood pressure, but nothing immediately fatal. The suit was administering painkillers and stimulants in measured doses. Kira knew that staying put meant certain death. The Xalfori were methodical. They would sweep back through the battlefield to confirm kills and collect tech from fallen soldiers. Her only chance was to move. Using her combat knife as leverage against the rocky ground, she pulled herself up to a kneeling position. Her enhanced vision allowed her to scan the terrain. About 2 kilometers to the west, she spotted the telltale shimmer of a Xalfori encampment, their energy shields distorting the light just enough to be visible to trained eyes. Most soldiers would have headed east, trying to catch up with their retreating squad. But Kira wasn't most soldiers. She'd been recruited into the Special Tactics Division, precisely because she thought differently. They won't be looking for a lone human moving toward them, she reasoned aloud, her voice barely a whisper. And I'll be damned if I'm going to die out here without taking a few more of those bugs with me. The journey was excruciating. Kira moved only during the brief periods when both suns were at their zenith, creating the smallest possible shadows. She crawled more than walked, using every crevice and boulder for cover. The Xalfori had superior vision, but poor heat detection in their natural state. Her suit's thermal dampeners would handle the rest. It took her nearly a full Earth day to close the distance. By then, the medical system in her suit was beeping warnings about her condition. She silenced them with a flick of her finger against the wrist control. She didn't need a computer to tell her she was dying. From her vantage point behind a cluster of meteor-formed stones, Kira observed the Xalfori camp. Unlike human military installations with their uniform structures, Xalfori bases were organic, living structures grown from spores they brought with them. The buildings pulsed slightly, like breathing organisms. Kira's attention was drawn to a central structure larger than the others. Its surface was adorned with bioluminescent patterns that indicated high rank in Xalfori society. Intelligence briefings had taught her to recognize the markings of their officer classes. "That's where you are, isn't it? The big bug calling the shots," she whispered. As night fell, or what passed for night on a moon with 2 suns, the Xalfori's activities changed. They became more sluggish, their movements less coordinated. It was a known weakness. Their hive-mind connection weakened during rest cycles. It was the perfect time to move. Kira disabled the safety protocols on her suit's medical system and authorized a massive dump of stimulants into her bloodstream. The rush was immediate. Her vision sharpened, pain receded, and strength returned to her limbs. She knew she was burning the candle at both ends, but she'd be dead anyway if she did nothing. Moving silently, she approached the perimeter of the camp. The energy shield wasn't designed to keep individuals out. The Xalfori considered themselves the apex predators of the galaxy and rarely worried about infiltration. It was meant to keep atmosphere in and radiation out. Kira had studied their technology enough to know that the shields had a harmonics pattern. Time it right, and you could slip through during the microsecond fluctuations. She watched the subtle shimmer, counting silently. On 3, she dove forward, rolling through the barrier with minimal resistance. A slight tingling sensation washed over her as the shield's energy field recognized her as foreign, but failed to respond quickly enough. Inside the camp, Kira flattened herself against one of the organic buildings. The surface felt warm and slightly damp against her back. She fought down a wave of revulsion. Humans and Xalfori had fundamentally different concepts of comfort. Guards moved in predictable patterns around the camp. Their exoskeletons gleamed dully in the bioluminescent light of the structures. Each carried a blade rifle, weapons that fired crystallized plasma capable of cutting through standard armor like butter. Kira waited for a gap in the patrol pattern, then darted between buildings, moving steadily toward the central structure. Twice she had to freeze as guards passed within meters of her position. Her suit's active camouflage helped, but it wasn't perfect. She relied more on stillness and shadow. As she approached the central structure, she noted that the entrance was unsealed. Another sign of Xalfori arrogance. They simply didn't expect enemies to reach their command centers. It would be their undoing. Inside, the building was even more alien. The walls pulsed with what seemed like veins carrying luminescent fluids. The air was thick with spores that her helmet automatically filtered out. The layout was circular, spiraling inward toward what had to be the command center. Kira encountered her first real obstacle at an inner threshold. A sentry stood motionless, its 4 arms holding blade rifles at the ready. Its compound eyes swept the area in overlapping patterns that left no blind spots. She weighed her options. A direct assault would alert the entire base. Her grenade would kill the sentry but would also likely collapse part of the living structure around her. She needed something subtler. From her tactical pouch, she removed a small device, one of the experimental tools her division had been testing. It was designed to mimic Xalfori communication frequencies. She activated it, adjusting the settings to emit a distress pattern. The sentry's antennae twitched immediately. It turned away from the entrance, moving toward the false signal. Kira seized the moment, slipping past it into the inner chamber. What she found inside was beyond her expectations. The chamber was dominated by a large, pulsating orb suspended in the center. Around it were 5 Xalfori, their exoskeletons marked with the elaborate patterns of high command. But one stood out, its carapace adorned with gold-like tracery and a distinctive helmet that seemed to be made from some crystalline material rather than the typical chitin. The captain, the one directing the slaughter of her comrades. Kira felt rage bubble up inside her, threatening to override her training. She forced it down. Rage made you sloppy, and she couldn't afford sloppiness, not now. The Xalfori were gathered around what appeared to be a tactical display, a 3-dimensional projection of the battlefield. They chittered in their language, mandibles clicking as they pointed to various positions. Kira's helmet translated fragments. Humans retreated to Sector 7. Losses acceptable for gains made. Final push will eliminate resistance. They were planning the next attack, an attack that would likely wipe out what remained of the human forces on Helios 9. Kira's hand moved to her sidearm. From her position, she could probably take out 2, maybe 3, before they reacted. But then what? She'd be trapped, wounded, and facing the remaining officers plus whatever guards responded. No, she needed something more, something that would matter beyond just a few dead Xalfori. Her eyes fixed on the captain's helmet. Intelligence had long suspected that Xalfori command helmets contained their tactical networks. the equivalent of human military AIs, but organic in nature. If she could get that helmet back to human forces, it could change the course of the war. A suicidal plan began to form in her mind. But then, she was probably dying anyway. The stimulants flooding her system were masking the reality of her wound, but they couldn't sustain her forever. "Might as well make it count," she whispered. She readied her grenade, her sidearm, and steeled herself for what would likely be her final act in this war. As she prepared to step from the shadows, a new thought struck her. The Xalthori relied heavily on their hive mind for coordination. Their captain wasn't just their leader, it was their network hub. That changed everything. Kira smiled grimly behind her visor. She now had a plan that might, just might, allow her to complete this mission and live to tell about it. It would require perfect timing, a healthy dose of luck, and the kind of audacity that had gotten her into special tactics in the first place. She took a deep breath and moved into position, waiting for the exact moment when the captain turned away from the others. One chance. That's all she would get. And then she would either die on this alien moon or return with a prize that could turn the tide of the war. The return of the impossible. The moment came when the Xalthori captain moved toward the tactical display, turning its back to her position. Kira didn't hesitate. She activated her grenade, but instead of throwing it directly at the officers, she lobbed it toward the far wall of the chamber. The grenade attached to the organic surface and began to pulse faintly. The Xalthori officers didn't notice, their attention fixed on the tactical display. Kira tapped her wrist control, activating her suit's emergency overdrive. Her muscles tensed as another surge of combat stimulants entered her bloodstream. 3 minutes, maybe 5, before her system would crash catastrophically. She triggered the grenade remotely. Rather than exploding, it released a concentrated pulse of electromagnetic energy, specifically calibrated to the frequency used by Xalthori neural networks. The effect was instantaneous. The officers convulsed, their coordinated movements dissolving into random twitches as the pulse disrupted their connection to the hive mind. All except the captain. Its helmet appeared to shield it from the worst effects, though it staggered momentarily. That was all Kira needed. She burst from cover, firing 3 precise shots from her sidearm. 2 lower-ranking officers dropped immediately, their exoskeletons cracking from the plasma impacts. A third shot caught another in the joint between carapace segments, not killing but immobilizing it. The captain recovered quickly, whirling to face her with unnatural speed. It raised its blade rifle, but Kira was already moving, diving low and to the side. The shot passed over her head, searing the air where she'd been standing a moment before. Kira rolled to her feet, ignoring the screaming pain from her wound, and lunged forward. The captain's reflexes were incredible, but it had clearly never faced human close-quarters combat techniques. Xalthori fought at a distance, or with ritualized blade forms. They weren't prepared for the brutal pragmatism of special tactics training. She slammed into the captain's midsection, below its primary arms. Her combat knife found the gap between thorax and abdomen plates, one of the few vulnerabilities in Xalthori anatomy. The blade sank deep, releasing a spray of yellowish fluid that smelled like oxidized metal. The captain chittered in what might have been pain or rage. One of its arms caught Kira across the shoulder, sending her flying into the tactical display. The holographic battlefield shattered into fragments of light as she crashed through it. Her helmet's HUD flickered with damage warnings. 2 minutes of combat stimulants remaining. The wound in her side had reopened, fresh blood soaking through the nano-bandages. The captain advanced, mandibles clicking rapidly as it issued commands. No response came from outside. The EMP had temporarily disrupted communications. It raised its blade rifle again. Kira's hand closed around a piece of debris, a shard of crystalline material that had broken from the tactical display. As the captain fired, she hurled the shard upward. The plasma shot hit the crystal, refracting into dozens of smaller beams that scattered throughout the chamber. One caught the captain in its compound eye, momentarily blinding it. That instant was all she needed. Kira launched herself forward again, this time aiming higher. Her momentum carried them both to the ground, the captain's blade rifle skittering away across the floor. She straddled its thorax, pinning its primary arms with her knees, a technique developed specifically for Xalfori combat. The captain thrashed beneath her, secondary arms reaching for her throat. Kira drove her knife repeatedly into the gaps in its armor, yellow fluid spattering her visor. The Xalfori's movements grew weaker with each strike, but still it fought. Warning signals flashed across Kira's HUD. 1 minute of combat efficacy remaining. Her vision was tunneling, the edges darkening as her body approached its limits. With a final surge of strength, she grasped the captain's helmet with both hands and twisted sharply. There was a wet, cracking sound as connections between the helmet and the Xalfori's nervous system severed. The captain went rigid, then limp. Kira collapsed beside it, breathing heavily. The helmet came away in her hands, heavier than it looked, with organic components still pulsing weakly along its interior. This was it, the prize that could change everything. But she wasn't out yet. Already, she could hear movement outside the chamber. The EMP's effects would be wearing off, and soon the entire base would be converging on her position. Forcing herself to her feet, Kira secured the helmet to her utility belt. She retrieved her sidearm, one plasma cell remaining, and took the captain's blade rifle. The weapon felt alien in her hands, but it was fully charged. Now for the hard part, she muttered. Rather than retracing her steps, Kira moved toward the wall of the chamber. Xalfori structures were organic. They contained systems analogous to circulatory and respiratory systems in Earth organisms. Her knife plunged into the wall, releasing a flow of luminescent fluid. She followed the flow downward, cutting a larger opening where the fluid pooled. The structure's equivalent of a vein led to what she hoped was an equivalent of lungs, a gas exchange system that would vent to the exterior. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. The passage was tight, filled with pulsating tissues that seemed to react to her presence. Kira fought down her revulsion and squeezed through, the captain's helmet scraping against the organic matter. Behind her, she could hear Xalfori soldiers entering the command chamber, their chittering rising in pitch as they discovered their fallen leaders. The passage narrowed, then widened suddenly into a chamber filled with folded tissues that expanded and contracted rhythmically. Light filtered in from above, a vent to the exterior, just as she'd hoped. Freedom was mere meters away, but those meters were vertical. Kira's HUD began flashing red warnings. The combat stimulants were failing, and her body was shutting down systems to compensate. Her hands trembled as she reached for handholds in the organic matter. The wound in her side felt like molten metal had been poured into it. One climb, she told herself. Just one more climb. Each movement was agony. Each handhold threatened to give way under her weight. Twice she slipped, barely catching herself before falling back to the bottom. The third time, her grip failed entirely, and she plummeted 2 meters before crashing into a fold of tissue that caught her like a hammock. She lay there for a moment, consciousness flickering. The HUD went dark, then rebooted in emergency mode. Basic life support only. No enhancements, no pain suppression, just enough to keep her alive. Maybe. Something sharp jabbed into her back, the combat knife still sheathed at her belt. It gave her an idea. With trembling hands, she drew the knife and began stabbing it into the wall, creating makeshift handholds. The structure seemed to recoil from the damage, tissue contracting away from each wound. Meter by agonizing meter, she ascended toward the light. Behind her, sounds of pursuit grew louder. The Xalfori had found her escape route. A plasma shot sizzled past her, striking the wall nearby. The organic matter bubbled and charred, releasing a stench like burning rubber. Kira reached the vent, hands slick with blood and yellow Xalfori fluids. The opening was covered with a membrane that pulsed like a diaphragm. She slashed at it with her knife, cutting a hole large enough to squeeze through. Fresh air, or what passed for it on Helios 9, rushed in. She pulled herself through, emerging onto the exterior of the structure. From this height, she could see the entire Xalfori camp in disarray. Soldiers rushed in all directions, their usual coordinated movements replaced by chaotic searches. Without their captain's direct neural link, their hive mind efficiency was compromised. Kira didn't wait to observe further. She slid down the curved exterior of the structure, landing heavily on the ground below. Pain shot through her legs, but nothing broke. The shield perimeter was still active, but now there were gaps in its coverage as the Xalfori diverted power to internal security. She staggered toward the nearest gap, clutching the captain's helmet to her side. Twice she had to flatten herself against structures as search parties passed nearby. Her suit's camouflage was failing, power reserves critically low. Breaking through the perimeter was both easier and harder than infiltrating had been. The gaps were obvious, but her strength was failing with each step. It took everything she had to time her dash correctly, slipping between energy fields that would have vaporized her instantly. Outside the camp, Kira oriented herself toward the human lines, now dozens of kilometers away. An impossible distance in her condition, but she had one advantage. The Xalfori would be looking for her to head directly toward human territory. They wouldn't expect her to circle around. Using the last of her suit's power, she activated the emergency beacon, a one-time burst transmission powerful enough to cut through jamming, but also certain to draw attention. It would tell her people she was alive and give them her approximate position. It would also tell the Xalfori the same thing. For 3 days, Kira played a deadly game of hide and seek across the lunar surface. She moved only during thermal peaks when her heat signature would blend with the environment. She drank water condensed from her suit's recyclers and ate the emergency ration bar she'd found in a forgotten pocket. The wound in her side festered, fever setting in despite the suit's best efforts. The captain's helmet grew heavier with each step, but she refused to abandon it. When her strength failed completely, she crawled. When she could no longer crawl, she rolled down inclines, using the terrain to carry her forward. Each centimeter was a victory against death. On the 4th day, her fevered mind registered movement on the horizon, humanoid figures in combat armor. A patrol from the 47th, searching the disputed territory between the lines. Or perhaps a hallucination, her dying brain offering one last comfort. Kira tried to call out, but her voice was gone, throat parched beyond use. Instead, she fumbled for the captain's blade rifle, the only Xalfori technology still functioning after days in the wastelands. With the last of her strength, she fired it skyward. The distinctive flash of Xalfori plasma would be visible for kilometers. It was a risk. It could attract enemies as easily as allies. But she was out of options. The figures changed direction, moving toward her position. As they drew closer, Kira could make out the insignia of the 47th Expeditionary Force. Her people. She had made it. The patrol approached cautiously, weapons raised. They hadn't expected to find a human here, especially not one still alive. Kira raised a hand weakly, showing the emblems on her damaged suit. Lieutenant. The lead soldier's voice was distant through her failing audio systems. Lieutenant Voss. We thought you were dead. Kira tried to speak, failed, then simply held up the captain's helmet. Even through her blurred vision, she could see the soldier's postures change from caution to amazement. Strong hands lifted her, securing her to a medical transport. Before unconsciousness finally claimed her, she heard fragments of excited communication. Tell command we've got Voss. She's got a Xalfori captain's neural helmet. Impossible. She was behind their lines for days. 3 weeks later, Kira Voss stood before the Allied Command Council on the orbiting station above Helios 9. Her wound had healed, though the doctors said she would always carry the scar, both physically and in her neural patterns, which had been permanently altered by the extreme combat stimulant regimen. General Takeda, overall commander of the Helios campaign, addressed the assembled officers. The intelligence extracted from the Xalfori neural helmet has given us unprecedented insight into their command structure, battle tactics, and communication protocols. For the first time since this war began, we have a decisive advantage." He turned to Kira, who stood at parade rest, her fresh uniform uncomfortably stiff compared to the combat suit she'd lived in for so long. "Lieutenant Voss, your actions have saved not only the Helios 9 campaign, but potentially changed the course of this war. The Xalthori are in disarray, their forces scattered without proper central coordination. They've pulled back from 3 systems already." Kira nodded, accepting the commendation with the same stoic determination that had carried her across a hostile moon with a mortal wound and an alien artifact. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. "Granted. The Xalthori aren't defeated yet. They'll adapt. They always do. We need to press the advantage now, before they can establish a new command hierarchy." The general smiled grimly. "That's precisely why I've approved your new mission. We're sending teams to every contested system, targeting Xalthori command structures. And you, Lieutenant, or should I say, Captain Voss, will be leading the operation on Proxima Centauri's 4th moon." Kira felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of anticipation rather than dread. Perhaps it was the neural changes from her ordeal, or perhaps it was simply the knowledge that humans had found a weakness in the seemingly invincible Xalthori. "When do we deploy, sir?" 48 hours. Choose your team." "And Captain," the general added, this time, "try to make it back in one piece." A rare smile crossed Kira's face. "Yes, sir. But if I don't, I'll make damn sure it's worth it." Across the galaxy, the news spread among human colonies and outposts. A single soldier, left for dead, had returned from behind enemy lines with the key to fighting the Xalthori. The story grew with each telling, becoming legend even as the real Kira Voss prepared for her next mission. On distant Xalthori worlds, a new protocol was established. For the first time in their history, they assigned guards specifically to protect their commanding officers. For the first time, they felt something alien to their hive mind psychology, fear of human ingenuity. They had thought she would die out there. Instead, she had come back with her captain's helmet, and nothing would ever be the same.